Hi, everyone. My name is Tara Hoops. You are joined here at The Rebuild with my co-host, Gary Winslet. Today, we have a very special guest, Congressman Sean Casten, who represents Illinois' 6th Congressional District. It includes a lot of Chicago's western suburbs and cities. He was first elected in 2018 and actually flipped a Republican-held seat at that time. Casten serves on the House Financial Services Committee and the Joint Economic Committee. Before joining Congress, he spent 2 decades in the clean energy sector, including as CEO of TurboSteam and founder of Recycled Energy Development. In Congress, he's focused a lot on energy policy, climate change, grid modernizations, and helping to lower utility costs for constituents all across the nation. Now we are very excited to have you. Representative Casten, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to jump in to the recently introduced Energy Bills Relief Act, which is kind of like the most ambitious, affordably focused energy legislation House Democrats have put forward this Congress. It comes at a moment when electricity bills are up at 13% in Trump's first year, and utilities just requested $31 billion in rate hikes. Tell us what is in this bill and why this is the moment for it.
So it's funny, like sometimes moments just come to you. Mike Levin and I, who came in together in 2018, have literally been working on this bill for 4 years. And we've sort of been half joking that we were just waiting for Trump to totally botch our energy policy and invade Iran to really make it resonant so we could run between the shackles. Somewhat more seriously, I mean, because we have been working on this for 4 years. When Mike and I both got elected, the speaker picked us to serve on the climate committee, and we wrote a set of 300 recommendations or 700 recommendations, about 300 which became law in the Inflation Reduction Act. But when we got all of our report done, we had a bunch of outside experts go and vet it, and we said, what is the biggest thing we're missing that's going to delay our ability to achieve these goals? And they basically said, really without exception, that the United States has never built transmission fast enough to deploy clean energy. We're very good at building gas pipelines, which means that we build gas plants where we can run the gas to it and at below it, but we try not to build transmission. And so we said, okay, we just got to have a package, and we have to have a package that when the window opens, it gets there. Now, I say this all in a climate perspective, but I could just as easily say it in an affordability perspective, because if you can keep your lights on and can keep your house warm and can get back and forth to work every day without buying fossil fuel, that also means you can do all those things without paying for fossil fuel. Clean energy and affordable energy are completely synonymous. And candidly, that's always been the biggest political barrier, because truly prioritizing the interests of consumers to have affordable energy is an existential threat to the fossil fuel sector.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned transmission, because like where you are, like we make tons of wind in Iowa, and Chicago's where it needs it. So you're just sitting across like exactly one of those sort of transmission corridors.
Yeah, and frankly, there's multiple projects that would bring that cheap power into the area, and they've been consistently bedeviled by the fact that grid interconnection is one of these things. The old joke is that asking a utility to connect to their grid is like asking a man for permission to date his wife. Whether or not that's the best outcome for all involved doesn't really factor into the conversation, right? And so when you're sitting there as a utility and saying power prices here running $90, $100, $110 a megawatt hour, and somebody wants to build a line that would bring $20, $30 power in, that's a competitive threat. And you don't need to be cynical about it. That's just a practical reality, right? No business wants to compete with lower cost supply if they don't have to. And so we've seen time and time again, utilities, regulators doing a really good job of building transmission lines to bolster reliability, and an objectively terrible job of building transmission lines for affordability.
Hasn't the region you're in, PJM, been like particularly tough on this?
Everybody's tough in their own special way. I try not to get into too much comparing of the various markets that are interconnected. I criticize ERCOT all the time because ERCOT has stayed uninterconnected. That's the Texas grid. But I think PJM on the bright side, they've been much more, because Illinois is PJM in the north and MISO in the south. PJM has done a much better job than MISO, I think, of really embracing markets as tools to solve problems. But all of the regional transmission organizations are really bedeviled by governance problems, that their governance is set by their members, and their members, because they have so much capital invested in the system, are innately lowercase c conservative. And so like these are like, what Mike and I have done, a lot of them fixes those things, but let's reform the governance process. Let's compel all the RTOs to be evaluated on a consistent set of metrics over the same geography and the same timeline. Let's give FERC the authority to permit transmission lines that they already have for gas lines, right?
Yeah.
We know that system works. We don't have the ability to do it.
Right.
But let's get rid of all these abilities for local actors to gum this up while still making sure that we protect consumers and the environment and all the things that we
Right.
do.
Oh, of course. I mean, and that would just put green energy on the same level playing field as natural gas, right?
Yeah.
What we've done with natural gas is been great, but like we should have electricity that's green and clean be on the same sort of level playing field there.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can see in the numbers, we've currently got about 1,300 gigawatts of generation in this country. There are 2,000 gigawatts waiting to be interconnected. Of those 2,000 gigawatts, 85 of them, so 85 out of 2,000 are fossil fuel fired. Everything else is wind energy, solar, batteries. That's what markets want to build because, like, wouldn't you prefer to build an asset that has no operating costs so you can make more margin? Right.
Exactly.
That's what they want to build, but that stuff is also the competitive threat.
I also want to ask you about the tax credits in this bill, because that was something that was really interesting. Could you tell us about the reinstated tax credits that are in this bill and like just what they do and why they help?
Well, so look, the simplest to answer the question is we simply restore all of the IRA tax credits that were taken away in the big ugly bill that the Republicans passed. The reason for it is, I think, is a little more important from a policy perspective than just, we're going to get back at those bad guys. The United States, if we were to totally embrace affordable energy, it would be a massive wealth transfer from the energy producers to energy consumers. Every single American is an energy consumer. A small number of Americans are energy producers. Do the math. All is more than some. However, for certain communities, that wealth transfer is really, really economically painful. You look at like what's happened to the West Virginia economy as markets have turned away from coal, and if you may be the greenest person around, but if you're living in a town where the mine shut down and then the power plant shut down and then the Walmart shut down and now the school can't support its, can't afford to pay for an improvement to the football field, you might understandably not see affordable energy as your friend. And part of the reason why we wanted to bring those tax credits back in is that when we crafted those, and when I say we, I'm talking Mike Levin and the other, 10 members of the climate committee, and then what became, the IRA, we were really intentional about saying we have got to put incentives in place that prioritize investments in those communities that have historically stapled their economy to yesterday's technology, because they're all Americans and we all are, and we want to make sure that everybody sees this as a win, not just the people who maybe don't depend on the oil derrick in their back, in their back 40, right?
Yeah.
And so those IRAs that had those incentives was really important to put that back in.
And it is great to see you champion for that, because that was one of the quickly first things that I saw coming out of this admin that was very disappointing to see, because there was so much progress that happened in the prior years. And it seemed like we were just starting to see what results would come from it. But then we also, I feel like, had people across the aisle who are kind of stuck in the past. Like there was a recent quote from Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who said, "I'm pretty confident coal will lead the world in global electricity production when I die." And I find that to be a bit mind-boggling, because I feel like if you look across the globe, coal is seeming of something of the past. We are just looking towards a new future that is going to be, again, like right now, we're in all of the above energy approach, but like that is all of the above. Like renewables are a part of that. So I know you have directly criticized the Trump administration's energy policies. What would you say to Republicans who argue that coal or fossil fuels are still like the cheapest and most reliable option?
Look, it's not freaking complicated.
I agree.
I mean, I could tell you academically all the reasons why if you don't have to pay for inputs, you're going to have a lower operating cost, and therefore you will compete in market. And that makes me sound like a college professor. If you don't want to treat it that way, like just look at the freaking scoreboard, right? The coal consumption in the United States has declined over 50% in the last 15 years. That's not because of wokeism. It's because a coal plant is a really lousy investment, and the private sector is not building coal because you can't make any money running a coal plant because the coal plants don't run that often because they get out competed by everything else on the grid. Oil consumption in the United States is exactly the same as it was 15 years ago. Not because of wokeism, because given the choice between buying a car that gets 10 miles to the gallon and a car that gets 30 miles to the gallon, or better yet, maybe it doesn't take any fuel, people like not paying for energy. Like, it's pretty awesome to not have that bill. So as I tell my Republican colleagues, like, shut up with your wokeism. You are just afraid of capitalism because you are a mediocre individual who cannot compete because you are part of that half of the population that is well below average. That's the problem. That is the Chris Wright story.
I cannot agree with you more. I saw that and I'm like, these are the people who lead and govern us. Like, oh my goodness, I am getting a bit worried. I'm so glad.
Well,
like,
and I beat on Chris Wright. Chris Wright testified before a science committee hearing that I was on before he came to Trump's office. And I told him that he was a disposable human being who would be an embarrassment to his grandchildren. I stand by my words. Nobody in the energy industry took Chris Wright as a serious player. He was a guy who could say things and could go on Fox TV. And he is as qualified to be Secretary of Energy as Pete Hegseth is qualified to be Secretary of Defense. These are not people who were recognized as people who really understood the nuances in the industry before they got there. They did a good TV hit, and that's what Trump wanted, and that's what Trump got. We have to engage with them because of their power and because they're tied with the White House. But when you look at what markets were building, markets wanted cheap, right? When you look at what the rest of the world is building, who's not bedeviled by this concern, they're making those transitions to more affordable energy. And, and we should embrace the idea that we could generate more money. Right?
No,
I'll give you a statistic. The United States, if you divide the U.S. GDP by our total energy use, we generate about $200 of GDP for every million BTU of energy. The Danes generate over 500. The Swiss generate over 600. The Brits generate over 300. That means we could potentially double the size of our economy with the same amount of fossil energy input, or could cut our fossil energy input by half or more and have the same standard of living. Why wouldn't you want to do that, right? You invest in labor productivity all the time. We want to get the maximum return on capital. If you're if you're a steel manufacturer, you don't want to throw iron away, right? You want to turn as much of that iron into steel as possible. Energy is the only place where the United States does such a terrible job relative to other first world economies at turning inputs into useful output. And we can either be depressed about that or say, what an amazing opportunity to grow our economy.
No, that's exactly right. And the other thing too about it is the United States has both lots of solar and lots of wind potential. Different places to be sure, but there's a lot of places that don't. Like, Denmark's got great wind, not ideal for solar. There's some places that have great solar, not wind. We actually have both. We're kind of just leaving a lot on the table, not taking advantage.
And candidly, our challenge is that we also have a lot of coal and we also have a lot of gas, right? And so you've got a lot of communities that have built their economies on that in ways that you don't have in other countries, that embrace that efficiency, sooner. I mean, Denmark's a little bit weird because Denmark really made the commitment to efficiency before the North Sea oil discoveries, and by then it was habit. The U.S. I think is sort of still deciding whether we want to be a full-on adult or whether we still like sort of, having the lack of responsibility that you have when you're a teenager.
Yeah.
It seems to me, just from hearing this, like the Democrats are people who would like to succeed in a capitalistic market, and it's the Republicans who are holding us back by trying to own the libs and arguing about culture wars
Yeah.
from 10 years ago. And it's just like that's not the narrative that you see online. Like when you think about Democrats and how they like move when it comes to innovation and something, you are thinking they are going to be the party that is going to be strapped by woke culture stories that you'll see in the New York Post that like are just going to harm innovation for all, and it's the Republicans who are trying to be the serious adults. But as you see, as you're trying to make effort here, it's just the opposite.
Well, I mean, look, there's ample data, and I hate that we have to say this, but the Joint Economic Committee, bipartisan bicameral committee, has done a bunch of research that shows that going back 6 presidents, the economy always performs better under Democratic leadership. And not just a little bit better, like a lot better. Like, 80, 90% of all the jobs created in those 6 presidents were created under Democratic presidents. The GDP always grows more. The dollar's always stronger. I will say that there's nothing innately Democratic or Republican about supporting competitive markets. Ronald Reagan, he was the guy that deregulated, the airlines and deregulated telecoms. That was a competitive, and led antitrust enforcement. So there is an ideology that works there. I think what's hard, and this is arguably just as hard for Democrats or Republicans, is that any business that has achieved a certain scale has a lobbying shop. Any entrepreneur with a great idea who can compete against that incumbent business doesn't spend their time on lobbying. And so you just don't, you hear very few voices on either side of the aisle in Washington coming in and saying, what we need is more competition. Like competition has never really had an advocate in Washington.
Well, it's funny you mentioned how bipartisan some of this stuff is, and you mentioned Reagan, because a lot of that deregulation stuff actually starts under Carter before him. Carter just doesn't get as much credit for the deregulation stuff as he probably should. But that just goes to your point that there's not like a Democrat or a Republican way to ensure competition.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, maybe this is just when I was born. I was born in 71, so I don't remember Nixon at all. I have vague memories of Carter, but Reagan was the first president I knew, so maybe that's just my own anchor point, right? But I do think that the Republican Party of my youth was a pro-market party. The Republican Party of today is a pro-business party. And those are not synonymous terms, right? And I think there's a real opportunity for Democrats to step into that void and say, let's be the pro-market party, right?
No, I think that's right. I did want to ask you a little bit more about this Energy Bills Relief Act, because I think if we could get it, great. How would you assess success in that if it does pass? In the first sort of 2, 3, 4 years, what does that bill succeeding look like to you?
So look, let's make no small plans. I think the last real meaningful energy bill that the Congress passed was the 1992 Energy Policy Act. That sounds crazy that it was so long ago, but we basically we do energy policies roughly every 15 years. We had the 1978 Public Utility Reform Policy Act, which was transformative. Then we had the 1992 EAP Act. We did one in 2005, but it was kind of small. So that's really the last big one. After EPACT was passed, within 10 years, we built 200 gigawatts of natural gas combined cycle because suddenly there was an incentive for people to build the lowest cost source, which at the time that was the lowest cost source. Within 10 years, the nuclear fleet went from running 60% of the time to 90% of the time because utilities had an incentive to dispatch their lowest cost assets. So I think we should hold that as a minimum measure of success, that within a decade, we should see a complete transformation of the U.S. grid. Because if we know that right now you have in the queue all of the generation we need to fully decarbonize and give ourselves an affordable future, if we don't deploy that instantly, then we didn't get the rules right, right? And and some of this that we've done is top down and mandatory, but a lot of it's just changing the incentives. So we've got provisions that says if a utility is investing to decongest the part of the grid that you're on to bring prices down, why don't we let them make a little bit more money instead of seeing that as a zero-sum fight? If a utility can deploy technologies that lower line losses on their grid, gets is the term of art, grid enhancing technologies. Why don't they get to keep some of those savings for themselves and give some back to the ratepayers? Right now, all of those things are zero sum fights. So a lot of what Congressman Levin and I've done is said, let's make the utilities partners in this, much in the way that the 92 Energy Policy Act gave utilities a way to say, I'm going to preferentially build the lowest cost assets, right? It's time for us to update that bill, but I think that's the measure of success is like, let's be ambitious. If we have a totally decarbonized grid where we are struggling to figure out how do we need to change the way that our markets work so that zero marginal cost supply can compete in a market that's awash in zero marginal cost supply and still actually get paid to generate because the markets will just bid to the highest zero marginal cost. Like once we're having that conversation, then I know we've succeeded.
Okay.
That all sounds great. And it's something that I do hope that we can get past, just because right now it does seem like we're like forever stuck in like a gridlocked Congress, which is why midterms matter so much and why I keep emphasizing that to everyone. But I do want to look outside of that, beyond this amazing bill that you have put forth. And I know you spent the last 4 years working on this. It is just incredibly politically salient right now, given what is happening. What would you say are the top issues that you're focused on? And where do you think you could make the biggest impact this Congress outside of this bill?
So the stuff we're really focused on, you'd mentioned at the start that my committees are mostly financial regulation. And I'm really increasingly concerned that our next financial crisis is either going to come from crypto or from climate change. Both of them are creating sort of massive systemic risks. And so we spend a lot of time in both trying to say, okay, where are those risks pooling in our financial connective tissue? And how do we make sure that we protect against them so people don't get lined up? And just because we're talking energy and climate, I'll just give you just a little example on the first one. 6 of the top 7 most uninsured housing markets in the country are in Florida counties. Miami-Dade is number 1, Howard County is number 2. I think Harris County, Texas is number 3, and then it's a bunch more Florida counties. 20% of all Florida homeowners are in the state insurer of last resort. So if that insurer goes away, they have no one else to cover. The total value of Florida real estate is about 3 times total Florida GDP, which means that it would only take, one, Cat 5 hurricane to essentially force the state of Florida into bankruptcy. Like I'm not being hyperbolic. Like you just start running the math of how much of a hit would you have to have. And the part of this, I think, is bipartisan, that we've never really done a good job of monitoring systemic risks in our financial system. We monitor systemic risks at a handful of systemically important banks. That, as we saw with the 2008 financial crisis, if the risk goes off the bank balance sheet and falls in an insurance company balance sheet, it doesn't exist anymore and our regulators don't watch it. We made some changes in the financial crisis, but now you've got what happens if it goes straight through the insurer onto the property owner who now says, well, I'm just not going to get insurance then because I can't afford it. Where does that risk start to pool? And our financial regulators are, particularly in this Trumpian moment, are politically scorned if they even ask the question about climate financial risk. And yet we know that those risks are there. And so we spend a fair amount of time, I could probably more time than you have, we could go into crypto as well, but there are similar systemic risks that we're trying to alert people on and hopefully get capital to say, this is smart, let me protect myself against that. But really, government should be, in the words of Jack Handy, I'd rather be rich than stupid.
Fair enough.
I definitely agree that was an important one to bring up. Just from someone who lives in Los Angeles now, for the first time in over a year, we drove down to Pacific Palisades and part of Malibu, which like over a year ago was completely burned down. And to see all the structures that were just like so iconic to someone, I'm from New York City, so like visiting here, living here, like I am like with tourist eyes, I am just like mind boggled by how beautiful it all is. And now it is just like complete rubble with not much work having being made, but a lot of it is due to the insurance pitfall that we have been facing here. And it's been like an ongoing issue that no one has really had the right answer to. It's kind of was something they were trying to ignore. And then the wildfires just blew it up and everyone's faces. And it's just like an ongoing thing to see it for the first time in over a year with my own eyes. And it was a very shocking and eerie experience, to say the least.
I mean, this is heavy, but if you've not read the work of Spencer Glendon, I would just highly recommend him. He has a blog called Probable Futures, former managing director at a wealth management firm. He's got just really into climate. And one of the points that he's been making for a while is that our species 10,000 years ago survived in a climate that's very similar to the climate we have right now, except we were migratory. And we need to start thinking about what it looks like, that we know how to survive, but in a climate that's as volatile as the one that we have now, our species, when confronted with this before, thought that it wasn't a good idea to tie all your wealth up into a single asset in a fixed geographical location. We didn't build cities on rivers or along coastlines because we couldn't count them to stay stable. That's a really scary prospect. But read the news. There seem to be a lot more migratory people now, aren't there?
Yeah.
It's funny because in a couple of different ways over the last few minutes, you brought up housing, because that was something else that I wanted to ask you about. A lot of our sort of first pillar of the rebuild and all the other stuff we do, like our cost of living blueprint, is about increasing the supply of housing. And so from your seat on financial services, what do you think is like the single biggest like federal lever that would actually move the needle on housing supply? Is it land use? Is it something to do with Fannie and Freddie? Is it something else?
Look, I think historically the stuff that has worked the best and been the most politically durable is lowering costs for first-time homeowners. And I say politically durable because if you have never owned a house, the price of housing is daunting, and we're seeing the average age of first home going up. On the other hand, 60% of Americans' households own their own home, and the majority of people's wealth is tied up in their home. And if you want to lose your next election, bring down the cost of 60% of Americans' primary source of wealth. And so there is, I think there is that.
Issue there.
Yeah, if you don't have housing, housing is a cost. If you have a house, housing is an asset. We want assets to inflate. We want costs to go down. And so where the Congress has been most effective is how do we help people get that, that first time buyer into a home, and whether that's through tax credits and some of the programs to lower those costs, or through things that we did, candidly after World War II, where, at least if you were a white American, you got a lot of opportunities to get discounted mortgages and get yourself out of, the things that we call projects were initially built as places where people to get some stable housing. And then, and I'm oversimplifying, but not by much, but generally that was very racially mixed housing. But then the incentives to go get a mortgage and lower the cost of first home ownership were applied in very racially disparate ways. And so the projects became like a racial thing, but that wasn't how they were first defined. And they worked, right? We saw home ownership spike with those sorts of programs. I think we're close on doing a housing bill that would have some good stuff in it. We've still got to work out some kinks with the Senate, particularly. It's kind of boring, but it's important. What does a financial buyer of a home look like, and how do we prevent financial buyers from coming in? And that sounds easy if you just say private equity is bad. Then if you go and say, does anybody have a friend who's got some investment properties? Would they be covered by this? What if you're a firm that owns housing to provide temporary housing when people relocate for a job and need a place to live? Does that count? And so I think there's some structural issues that don't work in what's come through the Senate, but I'm hopeful we'll have really hefty credits for first-time buyers and a lot of different structures, because it's worked in the past. And again, it stays away from that politically toxic third rail of saying, let's just lower the price of everybody's assets. I represent wealthy people in the suburbs. I would absolutely lose my election. I said, you know what we need to do is multifamily zoning on your property.
I appreciate your candor. It's very true and it's very fair. Trump has even said himself, like, well, the thing about building more housing, it will lower the prices of housing. So it is, I understand that point of view, but I am glad you brought up the fact to make it easier for people to own homes. I critique a lot that we are very much in a boomer economy, and it is very difficult for younger generations to feel that they can get ahead. I think the economy used to feel like a waiting room for people. Now they feel like they can't even get into the waiting room. But as much as I would love to pick your brain on that, we're coming short on time. I would love to do some quick rapid fire questions with you. Low effort, nothing crazy, just the first thing that comes to mind. What is something you think is too expensive and you can't say, like housing or electricity prices?
Something that I think is too expensive. I'm going to be wonky, like junk fees. Like, how much stuff do you get charged for that you're like, I don't even know what value I got? Like every one of those junk fees is too expensive.
When I bought a house, summer title insurance, I started looking into it. And I'm like, there was no reason that this should be this much.
Yeah, I mean, but like every time you fly in an airplane, like what am I paying for now that I didn't used to have to pay for?
And what is a policy or innovation that you believe is underrated?
The Office of Technology Assessment.
Okay.
Was this like amazing office that provided assessment of technologies for every member of Congress that was so robust that in my early years as an engineer and a consultant, we would go read OTA reports to get smarter so that we could go in and say, let me tell you how paper manufacturing works. Let me tell you how steel manufacturing works. I'm investigating next generation battery technology. How does that work? Gingrich just killed it back in 93, I think, 95. Has never brought it back. And I think, rather than criticize Congress for saying, why are you guys not up to speed on the new technologies? I don't think we talk enough about the fact that Congress had created an agency specifically to make sure that we were up to speed on that. And it was a choice of Newt Gingrich's Republican Party to make Congress dumber.
Bring it back.
And it hardly cost anything. I mean, it had a budget of like $10 million a year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just really penny wise, pound foolish.
Again, I'd rather be rich than stupid. That is a politically controversial statement.
What's something that people don't really know about your district that you find fascinating?
That my district was the last home of Muddy Waters. Coolest guy to ever come from my district. I mean, you would never know that Westmont, Illinois, if you drive through it right now, you wouldn't think this is a place where you get the blues. But if you got the blues and then you got on the train and made part of the Great Migration and came up north and inspired all these people and finally had enough to put down a down payment and live in a little house in your final years, the Westmont was a place to go. And it's a cool piece of history from the district that runs counter to people's stereotype, because this does not look like a district that you walk through and think, boy, this is the heart of blues in America.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. Yeah, glad I asked. And then the last one, what is something you think your district does really well?
We just have like really, really, and we have really smart people and really thoughtful people. And, I mean, as you can probably tell, like I'm a nerd at heart. I'm an engineer. And I love that every time I do a town hall, or when we do polls, you just realize that there's the sound bites that infect our public discourse, that you can put on a sign. And then you go and talk to people, and people they're just very nuanced and very thoughtful and appreciate the complexities of issues. And I don't know if that's true everywhere in the country, but I joke all the time that the smartest, most athletic, most charismatic, most talented people in America are all the ones in the 6th district.
Now they get reelected. That's lovely.
And not just the 55% who vote for me, to be clear.
All of them. Shut up those numbers. Well, this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you for all the work that you do. We definitely appreciate it. I appreciate you for taking the time to be here. And I think that's all the time we have, but we really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you guys.